Hi everyone, I'm Tanika. I work as a principal data scientist at Sigmoid, and today I'm going to take you through the topic transformers. So, transformers are your sequence to sequence model, which are a special class of your recurrent neural network architecture. Now, when we talk about sequence to sequence model, these are deep learning models that have become very popular for tasks like machine translation, text summarization, and image captioning. Even Google started using this model in late 2016 for its Google Translate. Now, the biggest advantage which makes them so popular these days is that we don't need to have any labeled data set. If you think about any neural network, the main challenge we have is that there is a captioning involved. There has to be the data has to be annotated and labeled, but that is not the thing with transformers. And another important advantage is that it leads to parallel processing, so which makes it run faster than any other technique. Now, if you look at this is a basic structure. What exactly the transformer do? You give an input. So over here we have a sentence in French, which the transformer has been able to convert it into English. In the further slides, we would be going deep into the architecture of the transformer and understand how exactly this whole process of translation from one language to other happens. So, if you think about the basic of a transformer, it consists of encoders and decoders. Now, to understand what exactly an encoder and a decoder do, uh, you can think them as like human translators who can only speak two languages. So, for an encoder, the first language is their mother tongue, which over here is French, and then there is an imaginary language. And again, for decoder, their mother tongue is English and an imaginary language. Now, if we want to translate a sentence which is there in French into an English, the encoder actually is able to convert that French sentence into an imaginary language, and then this imaginary language uh, conversion is passed on as an input to the decoder. Now the decoder converts this imaginary language into the English conversion, which is I am a student. So that is how the basic of an encoder and decoder look like. Now, if you look at this, this is more from the understanding point of view. I gave you an example of how it works. But basically, the encoder converts the input into a context. And it basically, this is a vector representation, which this vector is then passed on to the decoder. And once that passes on, it gets converted into an English sentence. Now, we'll further deep dive into the architecture of the encoder and decoder. Now, in encoder, we have two layers. The first layer is called the self-attention, and the second is your feed-forward. Now, this self-attention layer is the layer which helps the encoder understand what are the other words which are important in the sentence. So to think about attention, whenever you are looking at a sentence and reading a word, there are certain words are important from the context of that particular sentence. Our human mind is able to register. The same thing is being done by the self-attention module over here in the encoder. We would be understanding this in detail in the next session. And also, your feed forward is your simple neural network. Feed forward is your simple ANN, which takes the output of the self-attention and converts it into a context vector. Now, looking at the architecture of decoder. So decoder has your both self-attention feed forward and also the encoder-decoder attention layer. Now we would be understanding this in detail in the next session. So in this particular session, we understood what exactly is the benefit of transformer and why they have become so popular these days. Also, we looked briefly into the concept of encoder and decoder and how they are being used to translate from one language to another in the transformer. In the next session, we would be going into further deep dive into the self-attention layer and the overall architecture of the transformer. I hope you enjoyed this session. Looking forward to have you in the next session. Thank you so much. Hi everyone, welcome to session 2 of Transformers. In the last session, we covered about the concept of encoder and decoder, and we touched upon the concept of self-attention layer. Now we would be going deep dive in this particular session on the concept of attention. So first of all, if you look at an encoder, what happens is that we give a word or a sequence of word into an encoder, they are converted into a vector form. So basically a word gets converted into a number, and this is done by word embedding. Now this is passed on as an input to the self-attention layer, and they are able to simultaneously process each of these words. So unlike like in RNN, where you have a sequence of words which are being fed into the RNN, over here all the words are simultaneously converted into the word embeddings in the vector form are simultaneously passed on to the encoder. So now let's try to understand what exactly is the self-attention. So the self-attention module enables a certain word to focus on other words in the input that are closely related to it. So for example, if I have a sentence which is called the boy is holding a blue ball, over here the ball is related to blue and holding, but the word ball is not related to the boy. So so basically when we look at the attention, we are able to understand the context or the semantics of a certain word and its relation to the other words. Now, how is it important when we talk about the translation? So let's try to deep dive and look at another example. So over here, the sentence we have is the cat drank the milk because it was hungry. Now, if we look at the attention module, it will give, when we look at the word it will give a weightage, higher weightage to cat and lower weightage to milk. Now, so if we change this sentence and we make it to cat drank the milk because it was sweet. Now over here, the word it is referring to milk, and you can see the attention module is able to capture this relation. So sometimes we use more than one attention module to actually understand about, get more information about the nuance and intent of the sentence. So supposedly over here, the cat drank the milk because it was hungry. So over here, it refers to cat. So the first score by the attention module gives the cat a higher percentage. And if you look at the second score, over here, it's focusing on the word hungry. So now when this particular attention vector goes into the decoder, it will understand that it has, with the respect to the word it, both the word cat and hungry are important. So while translating, these two words have to be taken care of so that the overall the semantics of the sentence remains same. Now let's actually look at a translation example. So over here, if you look at the word, we have a sentence, the La Corde la Solar Zone. This is again a French sentence, and we have a word called economic and European. Now, when the translation happens, right, you can see that in English, the European has come before economic. Now, because in terms of the context, the way it is written in French and the translation in English, it makes more sense to have European first than the economic. Now, this particular thing happens because the attention module, as you can see, for the fifth word gives more weight to the European word than economic. So that's why the fifth word is European, whereas in your sixth word, it gives more weightage to the economic. So that's why the economic has come as the sixth word. So now you understand that if we would have done a word-to-word translation over here, then in that scenario, we would not have been able to capture this. And that's why self-attention is very important in the transformer. Now let's look at a decoder. Now, like we said, right, in a decoder is basically takes the input from the encoder and use it to process and gives you the to give you the output. Now, going back to the imaginary language example we discussed in the last session, that just imagine that if only uh, instead of just writing down, the imaginary language translation, if the encoder also gives certain keywords which are important to the decoder, that from the translation perspective, what will this help decoder? These keywords will actually make it easier for decoder to understand which parts of the sentence are important, and that is what it is happening. So encoder attention values which go into the decoder attention layer actually helps the decoder to understand the words which are important from the context, and that's why the translation happens smoothly. So this, but so now you can if you look at these layers, right, there are two layers over here, two attention layers. So the self attention layer over here will take up the encoded values, and the second one, which is basically your encoder decoder attention, takes up the encoder attention values, which basically are the attention values which are coming from the encoder. So both of them together helps the decoder translate the word from French to English. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the session today and understood the concept of attention. In the next session, we would be going into the overall architecture of transformer together to understand right from the starting when a sentence is given to the transformer, each step by step how it gets converted into the final translated English sentence. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome to session 3 of Transformers. In the previous session, we understood about the concept of encoders and decoders and also about the self-attention model. In this particular session, we would be understanding the concept of transformer architecture. The transformers work slightly different during your training and while doing inference. So let's first look at the flow of data during training. Training data consists of two parts. First is your input sequence and also your which is fed into the encoder, and second is your target sequence which is fed into the decoder. The transformer's goal is actually to learn how to output a particular target sequence by using both the input as well as the target sequence. So as you can see in this particular example, we have a French sentence which is converted into a vector format using the word embedding. And also another important thing to understand is that since we are not using RNN, where RNN is actually able to remember the sequence, the way the sequence is fed into a model, but we do not have it. So to understand the positional representation of the sentence of each word in the sentence, we do a positional encoding. Now this along with embedding is passed on to the encoder. Now in the encoder, we have a series of stack of encoders which take this and produce a encoded representation, which then goes into your decoder. In the decoder, the target sequence is pre-appended with a start of sentence token and then converted into an embedding format using word embedding along with the positional encoding, and fed into this goes into the decoder. Now in your decoder, you have two inputs. One is the embedded representation of the word of the target sequence, and another is the encoded representation which is coming from the encoder. Now these stack of decoders process this to produce the encoded representation of the target sequence. Now the output layer finally converts it into word probabilities and the final output sequence. So this is how it works during the training phase. And then the transformer loss function compares this output sequence with the target sequence from the training data. So the loss is basically to generate gradient so that we do back propagation and improve the model. And finally, once we have the final model, this is used for the inference. Now you would be excited to understand how exactly we have to work in the inference, because in the inference phase we will not have the target sequence. So what happens during the inference phase is that the because it's a sequence to sequence model, we generate the output in a loop. So we only feed the input sequence. Over here, we just have a start of this sentence token. There is nothing else which is fed into the decoder at this, because we don't have the translated version. Finally, once this is done, we will get one output, which would be the first word, which supposedly over here, like if we give the same input, we will get I. Now I, as in a loop, the output will go over here and gets appended. Now in the second iteration, I also becomes an input to the decoder. And similarly, what happens is that whenever an output comes, we keep on adding that output sequence into the decoder. So it keeps on learning from this output sequence to finally generate the final sequence. So so that is how the transformer is able to convert a particular sentence and translate into a final sequence. I hope you enjoyed this session and learned about the concept of transformers. This is the end of the transformer series. And in case you have any questions, please feel free to write in the comments, and I'll get back to you. Thank you.